We have two guests who are joining us now in the studio, and we want to talk about the price of what we are seeing on the streets. We saw this happening on Monday. We've been talking about the aftermath of that. We're expecting more protests and demonstrations on the streets in the country tomorrow, Thursday. They said it's going to happen twice. Now, on Monday night, there was this whole issue of places of worship being attacked. The mosque in Kibra, the Alaska Mosque, Al-Aqsa, and the PCA Church as well in Kibra. And we saw leaders going there yesterday to visit the area and to find out what the issue is and to appeal for calm. Religious leaders, the NCIC, the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, Civil Society, Amnesty International are there. Now, two of them are in the studio. The Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya, Irũngũ Houghton, and Commissioner Dr. Danvas Makori from NCIC. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
You know, I was trying to think, what do you say, how do you say NCIC in Kiswahili?
The acronym. The whole name.
The whole
Let me see who's good in Swahili. Then I'll say it. You're going to try it? Give it a try.
I'm probably the worst person. There are
No,
enough
I think
Kiswahili
that after
lecturers.
me.
Oh, after you, huh? And City.
Yeah.
Sitting to Mombasa.
How exactly was I brought into this conversation?
So can you say NCIC?
There's a whole
Kiswahili?
commission of NCIC before us here who can define it better than I can. There's a whole chairman director of Amnesty International
Not chairman.
next to me, and then he asked me to define things which they can define better than I. Sorry.
Define.
It is out of respect.
Translate.
Elders.
I will respect you.
And this respect thing and elder thing, throw it out of the window.
Forget about
Our
it.
generation.
You have to bear with CT.
So what is it? Tume ya mawiano.
Tume ya uwiano na utangamano la kitaifa.
Ndio hiyo.
See?
What?
Told you.
Tume
Ya
uwiano na
uwiano.
utangamano la kitaifa.
Tangamano is cohesion.
Yes.
It's integration. Uwiano is cohesion.
Uwiano. Uwiano Tangamano.
Utangamano is integration.
Ah, voila.
Yes.
Okay. What? Don't ask me to say that tomorrow.
Tume ya uwiano na mangadangano na taifa.
Tangawizi.
I mean, on this note, I guess Amnesty International would be Musamaha. I don't know if that works. But
No, that does not work.
Let's move to Spice to have a bit more spice. What would SpiceFM be in Kiswahili?
Usamaha,
Oh, wow.
msamaha wa
Dunia.
dunia Kenya.
Yeah, okay. Dunia Kenya
Amnesty is not kusamehe in Swahili.
to forgive.
No. Forgive is kusamehe, yes, not amnesty.
Well, it actually, the history of Amnesty really, it built around this idea that it's actually a very conservative history originally. The idea was that people would write to dictators and essentially ask them to pardon political prisoners, people who had expressed themselves but were actually being arrested for sedition. So it does come from the concept of forgiveness. But of course, now we are much more in a justice accountability framework. I'm still interested in SpiceFM. What would that be?
Eric
Spice.
wanted to say pili pili.
At this point, your brand managers are going haywire. So let's stop before we both get closed down.
I know.
How long it took to design and market
then-
Spice FM, and now
and
we
then
destroy
Pili
in
Pili.
about
They call
2
it
minutes.
Pili
Pili FM.
So let's move
Actually,
on.
he is not wrong. With Amnesty, the closest you get to is Msamaha. He is not wrong.
Okay, to pardon.
So msamaha wa dunia Kenya.
Yeah.
Well,
And my brand managers are calling me right now.
Also,
Irũngũ, stop that.
And the executive director is
Mkurugenzi.
Bas mtendaji.
Mtendaji.
Sawa.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, yesterday you were among the people who went to Kibra after a night of violence that saw, all these attacks into. Let's just be clear. It's not just the places of worship, but also people's businesses and some homes that got caught up in this melee. What exactly happened? What did you see and hear when you went there? Let's start with you, Irũngũ.
So I have to say that, in the 20 years or so that I've done work on, whether we used to call it ethnic cleansing or in the 1990s or the violence and demand for the constitutions or the second liberation or even more recently, forced evictions and so on, it never normalizes for me. Right? Just to watch people who have so little have all of that destroyed in an instant. So tens of kiosks, if people are familiar with Karanja and Kibra, tens of kiosks were destroyed. Homes were destroyed. And of course, there's been a lot of emphasis on the places of worship. But I think, people need to get the distance between those two buildings. And places of worship are not buildings. They are places for people to worship. But the distance between those two is literally a stream. It's not even a river. We crossed back and forth that river, and to have this sense that people would move from, would move from one church to the mosque and back and attempt to destroy both, is just really sad. It's the headlines today, I think, in the Standard speak about anarchy. But if there was anarchy, it was Kibra. And I think the warning signal is there for the assembly organizers and the Azimio and the Mass Democratic, the movement that is now beginning to develop around Mandamano. But it is also there for the National Police Service. And in particular, I think it is there for the politicians.
Look, based on what you're saying, and even for you, Danvas, the thing is that the destruction that we saw, can we attribute it entirely to the activities that took place on Monday? Because then for you to then go and destroy places of worship, is it something that was latent in the minds of people? Was there a previously brewing, simmering situation that perhaps we need to be more concerned about, that then these protests on Monday then gave way for this thing that was brewing to then live out? And should that not be a cause for concern as well? Because had the protest not happened, maybe it was just a matter of time then before we saw this other kind of...
Actually, what happened actually is very complex, so I cannot really answer you. Because the protests occurred even last month and nothing happened like that in Kibra. I'm going to give you the actual facts in the evening, but also there's a background to why what happened is significant. Okay. As Irũngũ has intimated, and what people don't understand also, we were on the ground, and our investigators and our teams and our contacts and observers, and you guys also understand very well, in conflict or in war, the first victim is truth. Okay, truth is the first victim. And propaganda takes precedent, and rumors start flowing. Now, even, of course, there's also the fog of war, so information not very clear to an extent, which is given. So even as it happened, actually, in the evening, as it happened, and we got reports, actually, I was in another studio, and then the chat got, but I was still in another studio, and when there's nothing as bad as or in a place like this, you're getting security updates, and sometimes you don't even concentrate now, because you can see it's really bad. And I even texted the host. I said, you know what, I think, don't ask me a question. You need to pause a minute, going to respond to something that it's really disturbing. When we went to the ground and got the facts, let me just summarize by this. A group of organized, I won't even call them goons. These were criminals. These were also a militia from outside Kibra, who were paid, who were well armed, went on a rampage for hours. They attacked the residents of Kibra, of both faiths, okay, of both factions, whether you are pro-demonstration or against demonstration, okay, and they had a single criminal intent to plunder and to cause as much damage as possible and to incite ethnic and religious tensions, okay. That was the intention. Do you know, and do the group, you see what that, so the mosque wasn't really burnt per se. The shops next to it were set ablaze because they border each other in the intent to set it off was ablaze, and the madrasas are next to it. The same group that did that is the same group that actually went and touched the church. It wasn't a retaliatory attack. It wasn't the Christians attacking who burnt the mosque. It wasn't the Muslims who retaliated to burn the church. No, that's what it seemed. That was the narrative in news, but that's what somebody wanted us to believe and to cause that to flare up. But we've so established it is the same actual group that attacked both places. Wow. Now that is dangerous.
And
that's why we just begin that. Yeah,
is external to Kibra.
Yeah, it's external. Actually, they were external. Nobody knows them. Nobody's ever seen them because these guys know each other. If you lived, it's really. I grew up in the hood, in the slums. You pretty much know everyone. You understand? Even a kilometer away, you know people. The whole people know each other there.
Yeah.
So if Irũngũ shows up, like I don't know him. So when a group of 100, 200 people, 10 people show up, of course these are not residents of here. How they talk, just even they know each other, but even how they do that. And they went on a rampage. It was unmitigated, unrestricted rampage of destruction, pillage, and horror. Okay, that we haven't witnessed in a while, and it wasn't for the resilience of the community, the leaders, the youth leaders, who even at night, I even didn't sleep that whole night because we constant phone telling, guys, you know to chill down, you don't react, don't respond until we get to the bottom line, because nobody knew what was happening. It looked like it was bad. It looked like this group is attacking this group, and it was really bad. Now there's a history to that. That's what's giving that. There's a brief history, and we wouldn't have time to go through it. But in 1996, there was these two communities and these two groups really fought each other really bad in Kibra. And in 2001, it repeated itself again. And somebody had the intention, the design to inflame, to incite, to exploit that. And as basically somebody poured fuel there and threw a match there so that Kibra can explode, Nairobi can explode, the whole country can explode. That isn't beyond anarchy. That is pure evil. You understand? That is, anarchy is where things are just spontaneous. Things are just bad. No, somebody actually planned that.
So there was a fault line here that's been in existence since the 90s.
Yes.
That had never been resolved.
Yes.
What is the issue?
Okay, we have a time, but so this the ethnic groups, especially the Nubians, seem to, from their perspective, that they're original inhabitants of that place, and they own the title. They usually say that. Everybody else just came in and took. Now the majority ethnic groups, the Luos, came much more, and they were way more than anybody else. Luyas and Kisis, and the Nubians tend to be majority Muslim. Of course, these other ethnic groups are not. So by nature, there's that aspect. And in the 90s, sometimes in this conflict, you don't know who started what. But the reality is there was a brutal slaughter. People were being slaughtered like cattle in Kibra and in 2000. Churches, most actually, were set ablaze, just like what we saw the other day. So somebody was trying to take us back there. And that is very disturbing. Just think about it. Somebody had an intention. Because these guys... Because we've been to Kibra. I've spent so much time in Kibra. I know those leaders there. They had no intention of that. Was not even in their mind. I promise you, City, that was not in their mind. Of course, there's one ethnic group that is not pro demonstration, and they made it very clear. There's one in the side which is their right to, and there's one which is for demonstration, which is their right to. But in terms of them hating each other and killing each other and trying to ban each other, that was not even close. It has never even crossed their mind. So somebody wanted that to happen. And I'm glad, of course, in the morning, the RCK stepped in. They called us, of course, because we work really close with them, because the civil societies. So because there's a lot of civil society presence in Kibra that is vested in the community. We've built resilience over time because we know the history of our country, especially in 07, where it all started. So over time, especially, that's why to us is concerning. We spent a lot of time in Kibra before the election to build that resilience so that even in case there is incitement, which you saw, that it doesn't explode and go beyond that. Yeah, so the violence that was not so much the residents between themselves. Of course, now the tension is still there. The bitterness has been re-evoked again. The anger is still palpable and raw. But we hope and pray. I'm going back to today afternoon. I'm going to spend a lot of time with the leaders there, the imams, the qadis, the sheikhs, and the youth leaders, really just so we can bring a semblance of healing and reconciliation if possible. But at least to come now, because tomorrow is still Thursday.
More demonstration.
And that fracture, that fissure is still open, that the wound is still open. Who can confirm that? So we really try just to maintain some unity.
I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the Nation on page 6, where there's a story of Kibra Sunis had battled protesters all day, residents claim, giving credence to what you're saying. But there's a quote here. They would often hide behind police vehicles as they fought with another group that was taking part in the anti-government protests.
Yeah.
The mention of the police, they are instances where it is even being stated that they were walking alongside police and they were armed with machetes.
Yeah.
Is this just people making up stories, or is this something that actually happened?
It happened. Fact, it happened. And POA, they'll do the investigation. I was one of the commissioners yesterday night. We talked extensively concerning this because now it's within their realm. And it will come it happened. And we have various reports. We verify, we have monitors, they have monitors too. And it happened. That's factual, actually, it happened. Sad to say, but it happened.
You see, where it takes me back to is not even 96. It takes me back to 92. Mm-hmm. When we first had reports of what we were then calling tribal clashes. Mm-hmm. And it was the narrative was that communities that had lived together for decades as neighbors were suddenly turning on each other. Mm-hmm. And the investigations in that time, what came out was these so-called neighbors from both sides of the divide, the Kalenjin and the Kikuyu, they'd argue and say, but we were also attacked. So one community was attacked, then the other was attacked. And ostensibly, the understanding was that they would assume that they were attacking each other. And yet, both were being attacked. And the reports coming from those incidences that none of them knew the attackers. They're saying there were people who they didn't know. So, as I'm saying, 1997, we had a similar situation. And the stories were exactly the same.
You know that analogy of and you've had it so well, and this is perfect now that you said it. And I even used that in Kibra when I was there. The analogy of somebody put black ants and red ants in a jar, and they're really fine. And then when you shake that jar, they at each other and start killing
each other.
That's exactly what happened, because the red ants and the black ants in Kibra, and same thing in 92, we have always lived each other peacefully until somebody shook the jar on Monday, intentionally, to cause trouble. Somebody shook the jar. So now is when they realize, okay, you did attack us, and the other guy, we didn't attack you guys. So somebody actually attacked all of us in the pretext so that we can now attack each other.
Sure.
That is evil.
Irũngũ, even as you think about this, because I think there are very many lines here that are being drawn and they're somehow crisscrossing. There's the whole issue of then being able to demonstrate, being able to protest, which the chatter is, across many circles, that you should be able to protest. It doesn't matter what it is. You should then also be able to enjoy security of state when it comes to protest. But then this is all being mixed with, and the truth of the matter is that the crimes that are being committed by very few people, but the majority of the people who protest with a cause. How can we explain that you should be able to do that? Because unfortunately now, anybody who protests is being colored with the crayon of criminality.
No, I think you're perfectly right. I mean, I think the lesson of March the 20th, and just to mention that, we saw protests taking place across 4 African countries at the same time as Kenya. The lessons from March the 20th were essentially that, a unconstitutional ban on the right to assemble inevitably leads to violence, right? It also reduces the level of trust between assembly organizers and the National Police Service. The Kenya National Commission about 3-4 years ago developed very extensive guidelines on how to organize protests and picketing. And, as Amnesty International, we have organized tens of these. And what we've learned is that, where you have goodwill from the police commanders, where you have an agreement on route and location, where you have, marshals that essentially make sure that the protest remains, non-violent. And just to mention, Article 37 is not absolute. It is limited by the words non-violent, peaceful protest. So if you manage all those conditions, it is possible for the protest to take place. And just the example of that is really what happened over 2022. How many rallies did we have, with the exception of the Kendal Cobble disaster, where we lost 2 people? How many rallies did we have across the country that did not lead to this level of mayhem and violence? So I think that's the first thing. The second thing really is that, we have to now, and it's really important, I think what Commissioner Danvas is saying, is we have to now recognize that in this confusion that has been created around the the denial of the right to protest, third force elements. I mean, it's not just shaking the jar. I actually like your analogy. I think there are green ants that are deliberately being put in the jar to bite both sides and then watch the chaos. But the problem is, and CT I think raised it very well, is if you have a national police service that is selective in the areas that it's policing, in the proportional use of force that it's using with certain groups. So, for example, if it takes 24 hours for the National Police Service to go to the Northlands and essentially, walk around after everything has finished, we need to ask the question, not just in terms of Northlands and Spectre, but we need to ask the question in terms of where they were in Kibra, because they were there during the day. But at the heat of the violence, they suddenly disappeared from the scene. Right, so communities were left essentially. What if I follow the analysis that you've just given us, communities were essentially deliberately provoked to fight each other, and then the police withdrew. Now, my question is: are we not at a stage where we need to ask for a change in policing strategy? Is the Inspector General responsible? And the part of the challenge of declaring to the nation that I am responsible for the policing of the protests is that you also have to take the responsibility when it leads to loss of life and it leads to property destruction and so on. So I think, it is interesting that we've not heard from the Cabinet Secretary of Interior recently. But my concern is, surely we now need to ask the question, is the country in safe hands or in a safe strategy with the current leadership at Vigilance House and Jogo House? So I think that's the second level. The third one is simply a question around community organizing, because I think ultimately what we saw in the 1990s was that the ethnic clashes or the state-instigated clashes were actually brought to a halt, partly by community organizers at local level, religious leaders. I remember the Father Kamau, Rose Bamasai, all those people that went into the communities and told them, listen, you are being played. And tomorrow, the same thing will happen again, because this is a script that has been developed over the last 20 years. So therefore, what we need to see tomorrow is really community leaders coming out and telling the communities, be careful. We don't have a framework yet for peaceful assembly, but we need to be able to make sure that we can distinguish between protesters, looters, and third-party bystanders. Well, actually, let me do. There are four third-party infiltrators, and the fourth one is just raia, civilians going about their business, opening their kiosks, taking their children to school, going to work. That is what we need to do. But unfortunately, with the current policing strategy, does not allow for that. So I think the turning point really has to be at the level of the National Police Service. And then, of course, we need to remember, it is not a policing problem. It is actually a political problem. So the dialogue needs to happen at higher levels. And given the hardening of the positions that are being taken publicly, I'm not sure whether there is enough leadership yet to bring the political temperatures down for dialogue to take place.
Let's take a break.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Tume ya Uyano na Tangawizi and Irũngũ Houghton, the Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya, talking about what we need to see to get peaceful conversations taking place. Irũngũ, you've just concluded here by saying the police have got a role to play. Are you expressly saying that the police should let people demonstrate if they want to demonstrate and what? Don't turn up?
So I think the Constitution is very clear on this matter. Article 37(1) says everybody has the constitutional right to protest, picket, and demonstrate. That is not an option. It's not an optional protocol for either the National Police Service or the National Administration or even the administration. It is a constitutional right. So therefore, it is, in my sense, it's non-debatable. What is debatable is the manner in which the assembly will be, conducted. And I think the first thing you do in a situation like this is you develop a level of public trust between the independent office, which is the National Police Service, and the assembly organizers. And unfortunately, that threshold is not there. and therefore what you have is cat and mouse games. You do not have the level, I guess, the principle usually for organizers is the no surprises principle. And I learned this the painful way when Carlton Minor, the Kibran lead student, was killed. The community were furious. They were very angry at the police officers, and they demanded that they be able to spontaneously demonstrate. They wanted to leave Kibra, go straight to Uhuru Park and hold a rally, and then proceed to the Jogoo house at the National Police Service. And I remonstrated them. I said, listen, notification is very important. But they were too angry. They got to the streets. There were about 300-400 youth that were on the streets. I called the OCS of Kilimani, and I said to him, listen, these people they're on the streets now, but they are non-violent. Please do not disrupt them. Agreement was reached very quickly for them to be escorted. There were plainclothes officers and officers who escorted them all the way to that roundabout at Nyayo Stadium, Nyayo House. And then suddenly a vehicle showed up, and people tipped out of it, plainclothes police officers, and started throwing tear gas. The youth basically responded with stones, and then suddenly we started to see even the trees, those lovely palm trees that used to be on Uhuru Highway being burnt. And I remember calling back the police leadership, and I said, listen, what happened? And they said, well, listen, we have jurisdictions. We manage a particular area, and then at the point that our jurisdiction ends, another jurisdiction happened. And what happened was there was not enough time given by the assembly organizers to transfer the responsibility to another jurisdiction. So they were okay up until they got to that junction, to that roundabout. Now that level of detail really struck me as important. So we don't have to seek permission from the police, and I think this is why what the Inspector General is doing is so counterproductive. You don't have to get permission, but the reason you give a notification is to allow for the security agencies to prepare themselves, and I think it's a legitimate thing. I think even for assembly organizers, you don't want a situation where you have 500 people, 10 marshals, and then there are a group of people who are basically looking at this as an opportunity to grab smartphones, or to destroy windows. So there is a relationship between the law enforcement agencies and assembly organizers. But in this current context, that relationship can't be built unless there is a stepping down from the position that is currently there. And I think the other thing we have is we have great institutions in this country. We have the Independent Policing Oversight Authority. We have the Kenya National Commission for Human Rights. We have the NCIC. Those are independent offices that could very easily monitor behavior of protesters and the police. And it would make policing much easier. I just, as I watch the situation, I just feel that, Einstein, if he came back to life, he would just tell, listen, people, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result is complete madness. With respect to people who are struggling with mental health and well-being.
And all of this.
Yeah.
Nairobi Senator said today, well, you know what? We're not even going to tell you now, moving forward, when we're going to have these protests, where we're going to have them, because of this thing. We come in peace, you disrupt the whole thing. So now the whole kit and caboodle, giving you information beforehand, telling you where we're going to go. We're not even going to tell Kenyans about this. We're not even going to do the due diligence of informing you. So the things that you're saying that would grant this supposed protection, let's say that, the police service had an epiphany and said, all right, we're going to do the things as we would normally according to the Constitution. Now, because of what they've seen the last 2 weeks, they've said, okay, fine. We're not even going to tell you then. We're just going to show up and do it. You wouldn't know if it's Tuesday or Thursday. You wouldn't know if it's Monday or Wednesday.
Even tell you the days, huh?
No. Why? So now that's where we are, Danvas.
Well, two wrongs don't make a right. It doesn't. That's an extreme reaction, which is also a wrong reaction. They need to be responsible citizens. Okay. And actually, by law, the best way should have done, and I like the example, and this is actually exactly why the law is written this way, because exactly the example Irũngũ was given. You see, by law, you ought to Public Order Act, you're supposed to give notice to the OCS, not the Inspector General of Police. That's not even his business.
It's a local
OCS.
area police.
It's very important because, if anything, the example he's given gives the example why you should give to the OCS notice, and every place you go to, because this you tell OCS Kilimani, in this case it's Nairobi Central, Kamukunji, all these places you tell, okay, this is happening, because then the state of Nairobi is saying that is actually being also irresponsible, and being a leader in the country, also that is also being insightful too. So just because one party did wrong doesn't mean also you do wrong. You're not helping the country. Do your part. If I was them, what I would have done is follow the due process. Okay, give notice to OCS. Then when they do what happened on Monday, then you can hold them accountable. You can legally hold them accountable, because now it's hard to hold from in a large scale perspective the police accountable, because you didn't actually follow the due process in terms of giving notice. Of course you went and gave the AG, you told the AG we're demonstrating, but that's not the law. It's not the AG's jurisdiction. It's actually the OCS's jurisdiction that actually you give notice to. So now it's really hard, because the police can say, well, you didn't give us notice, which is true, that you didn't give us notice. You understand? So you don't give a reason for them to do what they did on Monday. So the Senate actually is that hardline position actually is what is taking our country to the doldrums. Because be the mature person, do the right thing, take the high road. It doesn't cost you anything to walk to Central Police Station, Kilimani Police Station, Kamukunji Police Station, any other, and just say, okay, but LCS, it's not permission you're seeking to demonstrate. We have any back up, we're going this, we're going this. Let them do what they do. Now we can hold them accountable. Now we can say, they follow due process, and it's a constitutional right. They didn't seek permission. Now you've done on 3. Now, on the other thing, I can actually confirm. IPOA has been following this closely, because it's a sister commission, and this is really the jurisdiction and their mandate, police conduct or misconduct for that matter. And I can tell you, given the track record, and I would really hope they can continue track record of being independent. People, heads will roll, and people will be held accountable. You see, the POA's mantra is very simple. You following orders, or let me rephrase it now. They put it, following illegal orders is not grounds for your defense as a police officer, whether you're a commander or whether you're a police officer. And I feel for our young men and women who are policing on Monday. Sometimes we vilify them, like say police, wholesome. And I feel for them, because I work closely with them. And I can tell you, they are human beings who are really struggling with this issue too. I can tell you that. They're out there. If you carefully, did you see that picture of these 2 police officers getting water from Now that actually captures exactly what they go through, not just in Nairobi, across the country, whereby they're put in situations
that they are not immune to their own tear gas.
Not even that, but okay, not even that. But the put in situations,
their eyes are not any different. They're
not properly facilitated. Eric, if you have a gas mask, you will not. You'll not sucky water. You understand? If you have a helmet, if you have bulletproof vest, or if you're equipped well, can you imagine City being out there for minimum is 12 hours? Some of them were actually out there for 18 hours without food and water, and without an allowance.
Yeah.
And you're subjected to this violence, and now the country is blaming you
and taunting.
And taunting. You know, so even you as a human being. So we have to also to be fair for them, and they're going through a lot. So I'm giving this both sides so that people can understand the complexities of these issues. So that now the hard line from the senator of Nairobi and then from Azimio should really go that way. And this hard line of what my good friend Irũngũ said, saying blanket no is not even helpful. Actually, that you're seeking basically, because in this example, these people are very peaceful. From Kibra, they marched to the Ngongoro, I don't know which way they used, until they got there. And then when tear gas came out, now zones free. So you know what's going to happen. So going forward, tomorrow is Thursday. The best way is let there be peaceful demonstration, policed. That's their right. So with proper security. And last but not least, I'm going to set an example, and this can be controversial. Remember what happened in 2017? And any rational Kenyan can agree the swearing in was illegal, of course.
2017.
Swearing in. The swearing in of
2008 or
no swearing in of yes, self-swearing in
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The people's president.
Remember that incident? And later, of course, we'll preview to the discussions behind the scenes in terms of security and the deployment. The police, there are people who are saying, "No, do not allow these guys." Of course, we all know it is illegal. It shouldn't happen. And somebody wanted the military to be deployed, but somebody in the wisdom that morning pulled the police out of the streets. What happened? The Prime Minister came, sworn himself in, and everybody went home. And it was peaceful. Nothing happened. Do you remember? There was no violence. And okay. So he did it. So what? Nothing happened. You understand? And there were hundreds of thousands of people at Uhuru Park.
It was a massive crowd.
It was a massive crowd. Not even a single stone was cast. Nothing was damaged. You understand? Because they let them, you do your thing and go home. Now, I would do the same thing. Let these guys come. They'll go to Jakarta. Let them do their thing and go home. Trust me, if we take that route, nobody's gonna, because they have been going around the country doing their rallies. Nobody has bothered them. They have been peaceful. You understand? Until somebody said no, we can't allow it. Now there's confrontation. So it's not helpful also to our country when those hardline stands are taken. So both parties need to understand. Let's follow the due process. And sometimes wisdom, that wisdom of 2017 saved the country from a bloodbath. That was gonna be carnage. There will be a bloodbath that day because people came in the hundreds of thousands. And there were people from was saying, let's deploy the military because that is just illegal. That is actually treasonous. Okay? But somebody said, what? Let's pull back. And they did their thing and they went home and no harm done. You understand? So that's the reality of the history of our country too.
Commissioner, what I find disturbing is that we are having a 20th century conversation, a multi-party era conversation in a multi-party era.
True.
We are talking about things that happened in a one-party system where the president, not presidency, could decide exactly what they were going to do, and the conversation sounds to me exactly the same.
So given that I wasn't born in the 1990s, I can't corroborate that argument by City Muga, but I think he's making an important point. He's making an important point. I mean, I think we are making unreasonable requests of our police officers, to be honest. And I think it's not just the potential harm that they face, but it's also the futility of what is happening. I mean, just to give you an example, the first set of protesters were processed through the Kiambu court this week. So Calvin's Okoth, Nuru Maloba, and Charles Ooko were arrested by the police for being part of the demonstrations. I think on March the 20th. They were arrested on the 24th, and they were then held in custody. And the DCI tried to detain them for 10 days. They got legal representation. They have just been released in a very scathing commentary by the judge that simply says, investigations have to precede arrest and prosecution. You cannot arrest
and then investigate.
Then look for information to put people on their defense. So I think what we're going to see really is another level of futility where protesters are taken to court and the law does not substantiate their arrest or their prosecution. And then the question we need to ask ourselves is, we have people in hospital, we have people burying people as we speak. We have communities trying to rebuild their neighborhoods and their businesses. We have protesters essentially being rushed through court and it's collapsing. In whose interest is this? Like, what is the greater interest that that the authorities are essentially implementing? And is it not just much easier to start the conversations around how do we exercise Article 37? How do we set up the political dialogue conversations? How do the independent offices support the National Police Service to do lawful policing during the assemblies?
Have you reached out to the IG of police? Or at least the National Police Service Commission?
So I'm probably not at liberty to go into that because I will put him on his defense. But just to say that I call everybody. Everybody's number that I have receives a phone call. Some people respond, some people don't respond. But I keep calling because I do have it that these offices are not there for personalities. They are there and they have a duty to serve the public.
Right.
And I just hope that some of my calls are picked more quickly than others.
NCIC, have you reached out to the
We're in the
command?
process. We're in the process.
You're in the process. What's the process?
Well, because he can make calls. Of course, as a private citizen, and of course as the ED of Amnesty. But in government, unfortunately, what is recognized is hard copies
of a letter.
Yeah, I talk to these people probably
and stamped
on a daily
receipts.
basis, but you can never say I have to. Officially, me just calling isn't enough. Usually, it's the letters have to be written, received, then responded. So the process actually is been initiated.
Based on what we've seen before and how very quickly things can hurtle into a situation of total anarchy. Is it time for conversation to be had? Is it time for dialogue between the two sides?
Actually, it's past time for dialogue, if you ask me. And why I'm saying this, and so to answer that, let me put it in context. So there's the human cost. So the official count that is given sometimes is not accurate, because I was doing Kibra. I mean, when you hear people telling you who lost their life yesterday night vis-a-vis what is reported, there's disparity. Okay, so there's a tremendous cost to human life. There's cost to property, what you saw in Northlands, what you saw in Kibra, in CBD, there's that cost. There's loss of revenue to drivers. There is a general loss of the economy. So money was 3 billion. And there's I don't know, you saw that data. On the Tuesday after demonstrations last Monday, there was net capital flights from NSC of 8 billion. Yes, so that week we lost 9 billion from the Nairobi Stock Exchange of capital. This is foreign capital. This is hard dollars that we need. So if you add 9 billion plus 3 billion,
12.
Plus, I mean, it's a lot of money. So human cost, human life, the social fabric is being torn. We are being traumatized. I mean, the cost is so enormous that if you are a rational, sober, sane person, and you care about this country, you're like, okay, we need to do something. And like Irũngũ said, you cannot do something over and over, expect different results. So this thing of this taking hard lines and digging in is not helping our country. It's costing us billions. It's costing us human lives. It's costing our country. As we speak, as we're busy doing all the shenanigans, 2 weeks ago, Angola and Ethiopia overtook us in terms of GDP. Okay, our economy was slated to grow by IMF standards to 2.3% last year. I think it's going to be flat, if you were to ask me. So we're not. This is a lose-lose situation. So to answer your question, if you care about this country and it's a losing situation, you better find a way to make it happen. So there's no way out apart from serious dialogue that will be rational. And if people need to be mediated by parties, there are people who are experts. We are international. These guys are. The social community are. The Americans are willing to. They've expressed interest. So there are people actually willing to shepherd this process. Say, guys, I mean, at the end of the day, it's Kenyans and Kenya.
Come to the table
losing.
and let's talk.
Yeah.
What should those talks yield? Well, apart from cessation of demonstrations, what else?
Well, see, some of the demands, of course, which have been, to be very frank with you, I don't want to say reasonable, they're just not practical. Okay? To just be very frank with you. There's some of the demands are not going to happen. And especially when you have two parties that are conflicting. Demands are not one way. We've only seen Azimio saying we want these. The question is what the government wants. So to me, also, it's fair to hear this side. But to me, it should. I think it's only fair if so far the grievances, of course, have been cost of living. Azimio needs to give their side. Okay, this is a solution we want to do. Okay, give us a solution and implement it. And I know people are very issues about this issue of handshake. It has been given a negative connotation. Okay, but in reality, let's face it. Let's not forget. It's because of what happened in 2018. But let's not forget the concept of a handshake. It's deal making. You understand? So you can make a deal about the economy. So you can shake hands and say, you know what, we'll implement one or two ideas from this side. Yeah. Okay. Let's shake hands on that. It's a deal making. So it's not we've paralyzed this idea that we think it's about sharing government. No. It's about let's shake hands and agree to something. It's about an agreement. And then let's be very frank.
We'll give you the server. You can go with it. Open it at your own time.
In fact, keep it at home.
Muleta 2027.
So we can use it.
We can use it for that election. In the meantime, stay with it. Irũngũ, what should this?
Well, I think there are a number of issues that have been raised by Azimio. There are other issues also that are being raised by the general public. I mean, I think the first thing is to start unbundling them and beginning to focus on them as specific conversations. So, of course, there are issues around electoral justice. I think that is less about what happened in 2022. It is more about the fear that the Electoral Commission is going to be reconstituted in favor of one political formation than the other. So I think, thinking about that process, and I don't think we have to only revolve around the return of the 4 commissioners. I think we have to look at is the Electoral Commission going to have the integrity to manage the elections in 2027 in a manner in which not just the political formations are comfortable, but also they are capable of protecting us, the voter. Electoral commissions are not parties, representatives of political parties. They are not committee of party agents. They are essentially there to protect the voters' interest. And I think that's the first set of conversations. The second one really relates to economic recovery. And, this is probably the most powerful demand, I think, that's coming through from Azimio, because it resonates with people whose households and economies are collapsing. So there needs to be an inclusive conversation about what that would look like. And it has to be realistic in the sense that, there are certain levers that can be used, social protection measures. The last one really is around inclusive governance. And I think the bigger issues that perhaps are there but are not being addressed is the concerns that we now have a bloated government with the chief administrative secretaries. We have the handing out of jobs based on patronage. There's been the raiding of the National Assembly in terms of opposition parliamentarians. There's an attempt to capture the media. And lastly, the National Police Service is not independent. Therefore, it cannot essentially serve all without fear of favor.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Irũngũ Houghton, Dr. Danvas Makori, asanteni sana. Thank you for tuning in to Kenya's biggest conversation. Have a lovely day.